Yellowstone in northwest Wyoming, land of geysers, mountains, and lakes, is also sitting atop a super volcano. And it just took what scientists describe as a deep breath, causing miles of ground to rise dramatically. So what does this mean?
Scientists are releasing a new warning about the threat of a massive super volcano eruption.
NASA wants to spend $3 billion drilling into a volcano to save the United States.
But who's going to spend a few $1 billion for something that happens once every 1,000 years?
It's right now we don't have an issue. So we go, we have other things to worry about.
According to the United States Geological Survey, 3 extremely large explosive eruptions have occurred at Yellowstone in the past 2.1 million years, with a reoccurrence interval of about 600,000 to 800,000 years. The most recent took place 640,000 years ago, suggesting that Yellowstone is overdue for an eruption. Swarm of earthquakes have hit Yellowstone National Park over the past week. The park is home to a massive supervolcano that could erupt at any time.
The first sign of trouble will be increasing seismic activity.
Visitors of Yellowstone National Park have been advised to keep off the roads. That's because the heat from a supervolcano beneath the Earth's surface is melting away the asphalt. It's basically turning the gravel into oatmeal.
Yellowstone National Park could be sitting on a time bomb.
Well, scientists at NASA are now trying to prevent future events, which they say may just be the only way to save the human race.
I was reading this today and I'm starting to freak out. NASA is planning on drilling into Yellowstone to save the world.
There is a super volcano underneath the national treasure that's more than twice the size of the park itself.
Tasha, the U.S. Geological Survey has tallied up over 500 earthquakes in that area in the past week. Now, this swarm began on June 12th and it is currently ongoing.
So is the swarm warning us about a looming disaster?
They're relieving pressure? What are they doing?
You know how, like, if you have like a giant cyst and you sort of make a slice in it, you can kind of squeeze everything out of there.
I've seen doctors do that. I've never seen NASA do this.
NASA experts analyzed the problem. They thought the most logical solution would be to cool the volcano down. NASA has a plan to drill a hole into the side of the volcano and pump water through it. When the water comes back out, it'll be heated to over 600 degrees, slowly cooling the volcano. The team hopes that given enough time, this process will take enough heat from the volcano to prevent it from ever erupting. According to the BBC, Brian Wilcox, a former member of the NASA Advisory Council on Planetary Defense, talked about the actual devastation that could come from an eruption and the risky techniques that the agency is considering for preventing one, including ways that could potentially set one off. The possible plan would drill into the bottom of the Yellowstone volcano using high-pressure water to release heat from the magma chamber. But Wilcox said this could be very risky. He told the BBC this can make the cap over the magma chamber more brittle and prone to fracture, and you might trigger the release of harmful volatile gases in the magma at the top of the chamber, which would otherwise not be released. Although NASA is considering other plans, it seems that cooling down the volcano could work even though it's a risky process. And it's not cheap either. The plan would be around an estimated $4.5 billion.
In the next year, we would see the most tectonic activity we've ever seen.
There is so much data being gathered out of Yellowstone by the government at the moment that they're having to use a supercomputer just to analyze the data from, second to second.
And if the supervolcano at Yellowstone National Park erupted, its debris could cover the entire United States from coast to coast. That's according to a new study published in G-Cubed. That is the Journal of Geochemistry, Geophysics, and Geosystems. Some scientists predict the catastrophe could happen as soon as 2016.
There's all sorts of disasters that could happen to us that we don't really plan for because human lifetime is 100 years, technology is a few hundred years, but maybe there are disasters that happen every 1,000 or 10,000 years, right?
What damage would we actually be looking at? Would we be looking at like another Pompeii?
They say that Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Colorado would be completely covered in many feet of this ash. It would cover the coast to coast of the United States. And it might sound a bit startling, but it's entirely plausible that this could actually happen. It's estimated that it would spew 330 cubic kilometers of volcanic ash into the sky. And the last massive volcano out of Yellowstone, according to scientists, spewed tens of thousands of cubic kilometers. So it's not completely impossible. It would affect generating power, breathing clean air, water we drink, everything.
So you're here to scare us.
Absolutely.
It's 2.5 times the size of what we thought.
Yes.
How significant is that? What would an eruption really mean?
Well, this is so big that previous eruptions, the last eruption that happened 630,000 years ago, was measured to be about 2,000 times greater than the Mount St. Helens eruption. 2,000 times bigger. That's enormous. It's enough that the last eruption spread 10 feet of ash in regions 1,000 miles away. So that's a pretty big eruption.
I mean, Yellowstone National Park is also located in a really seismically active region, isn't it?
Well, you have to think that the whole region essentially is the basin of an ancient volcano. Magma chamber below Yellowstone, it measures about 55 miles wide, 20 miles in length, and it's 6 miles below the surface. This chamber is absolutely packed full of magma, and an eruption from this could really cause widespread destruction.
These are things that it's some people's areas of expertise, but no one has figured everything out, right? Like, we don't know all the forces that are pushing around the Earth to make volcanoes and earthquakes, stuff like that. So
forget the image of Yogi Bear representing Yellowstone. We're talking about a sleeping Godzilla underneath Yellowstone that, if it erupts in a maximum eruption called Category 8, it could literally tear the guts out of the United States of America. Instead of having 50 states of the Union, we would only have 30 states of the Union. Now that's Category 8. This report looked at Category 7, which is much more likely once every 1,000 years rather than once every million years. That means in every century, there's a 10% chance that somewhere on the planet Earth there could be a supervolcanic Category 7 eruption. That's the danger.
You just talked about a volcano that could wipe out 20 states. How in the world is that possible?
Well, it's happened before. 2.1 million years ago, 1.3, and also 0.6 million years ago. We have the evidence of a gigantic eruption that is sufficient to tear the guts out of the US of A. So this report has to be taken seriously.
Because tectonic activity right now, depending on which seismologist you read or which publication you look at, but they're pretty much all lining up now, agreeing that this is the most seismic activity ever recorded since they began to record globally about 100 years ago.
But that's what's making us very nervous, because the cycle time corresponds to the present day era. So every single burp, murmur of this gigantic potential supervolcano, including the rise of the sea level, has to be watched very carefully.
What type of damage are we talking about here?
We're talking about immediate damage out to 100 miles from the site. That is total devastation, basically wiping out everything in sight. However, the real damage goes out to 500 miles if you include volcanic ash, poisonous gases, death of wildlife and vegetation, and that's a ring about 1,000 miles across. That's the heartline of America.
It would pretty much wipe out Earth as we know it?
It would wipe out the United States as we know it. And again, we don't want to panic anybody. It could happen tomorrow, or it could happen 100,000 years from now. Eventually, the law of averages catches up to you.
What would we get in the way of warnings, Michio?
You don't get much warning. What happens is the ground starts to rise, more and more earthquakes take place, more ash and volcanic gases start to be unleashed. That's about the only warning we get, because we do not have a good way to predict volcanic eruptions.
Would there be anything we could do to prepare?
All you can do is run. Several weeks in order to begin evacuation if and when such an unlikely event were to take place.
Are we getting a better way to do it, or are we just at the mercy of Mother Nature?
We're still clueless. We're still monitoring it very carefully, looking for the warning signs. That's why this sudden rise in the Earth, even though it's not immediately dangerous, is being looked at very carefully, because we have no experience with supervolcanoes. We've seen Mount St. Helens, we've seen Krakatoa, but a supervolcano erupting in our lifetime, we have no understanding of the scope of that thing. We just see the evidence of previous eruptions. It's black magic trying to predict exactly when it's going to blow, but we do know one thing: one day it will blow.